Let's speak now to Dr. Iraj Abedian, Chief Economist at Pan-African Investment and Research Services. Thank you very much for your patience with us. Maybe let's talk about the operating environment in South Africa ahead of the delivery of this speech. Just for a little bit of context, how would you characterize it?
Thank you very much, Dudu, and greetings to our viewers. The characterization of the socio-economic environment at the moment is along the following lines: an economy that's been neglected for a long time. Its underpinning is key infrastructure, including electricity, rail, roads, broader infrastructure, even the key important infrastructure of public service capability. These are all neglected for 10 to almost 15 years. Much talked about, very little done about it. And so that's an environment. The economy has been declining in terms of growth. This growth was obviously hit by the COVID pandemic, and post-pandemic it bounced back, but it's declining again because some of its constraints in terms of availability of power, in terms of availability of infrastructure, are just simply not dealt with. It's not addressed. As a result, you see government revenue is beginning to nose down. On the other side, government, to keep things going, has to keep borrowing more and more at a time that interest rates are high and are likely to remain high for a while, possibly for as long as another year. So that's the environment in which the 2023 budget speech has to be constructed.
And in my very simple thinking, the president makes the promises during his State of the Nation address, and then the finance minister must find the money to fulfill those promises. When we speak of the working class in South Africa, what are you wanting to hear from the finance minister in terms of some of the promises that were made by the president, for instance, in terms of helping people with the issue of load shedding, or at least buffering the effects of it, the installation of solar panels? While we don't have detail in terms of how it will work, what do you perceive, or how do you perceive it should work?
I think this is the single most important segment of this year's budget. Every year's budget is important, but this year particularly is critical in terms of what the president promised, and also the way in which, and the different ways in which this can be rolled out. My own view is that hopefully the National Treasury, together with other departments and other external experts, will come up with an implementation of what the president promised in terms of the rollout of transition from reliance on coal and reliance on Eskom alone to a more diversified rollout of let's call it solar and or alternative sustainable energy. And that could mean a number of ways of doing it, and this is what we have to wait until tomorrow to see what the minister has come up with. That could change the landscape substantially in terms of reliability of energy. If, for example, instead of centralizing and going about it through an administrative role of appointing a minister of energy and a whole lot of other expenses, making the government top-heavy, if they go the asset finance route, get the capabilities of the private sector, especially the banking sector, to help the state to get the subsidies that the government wants to give, so that you and I and the small businesses and medium-sized businesses get off the grid as quickly as possible. And luckily, the technology allows us, if we coordinate our activities, to be able to do it within 12 to 18 months. But will they go that way? We'll have to see tomorrow.
And that's just it. I'd like for us to stay with the issue of SMMEs. What sort of interventions could we possibly, or we don't have a crystal ball, but if you were the finance minister, would you maybe announce tax breaks, especially in light of this crippling load shedding with a number of small businesses folding?
Quite frankly, if I was in charge, I would go away from sort of tax breaks. I would put, like many countries, like European countries have done, to some extent Kenya has done, so it's no longer a sort of secret thing that we have to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of successful models where national treasuries provide certain brackets for different SMEs, for different big business and small business and households, different income brackets, so that they can convert to solar. And it's important to mention that this is an opportunity to make sure that the poor segment of our communities, those who live in so-called townships or even informal residential areas, they have access to this government subsidy in order to get electricity, so that their families and their children can have access to electricity. This is an opportunity, a once-off opportunity. I hope the minister is not going the route of tax subsidy. Remember, tax subsidy applies to those who have already got annual tax return and they've got a tax number and so on. And the great number of our citizens don't have income to send annual tax return. They don't have that number. So if access to these subsidies is going to be through a tax relief or some tax deductibility of some kind, once again, it will exclude a lot of poor and a lot of working class. And who will benefit from this system? The rich and the middle class. Not that they shouldn't benefit from it, but it should not be exclusively for the rich and the middle class and those who have taxable income and tax number. So I think the modality of delivery of what the President said becomes absolutely critical for closing the gap between the poor and the rich, at the same time supporting the SMEs, which I would certainly do, in terms of making sure that they have access to sustainable and effective, I don't want to use the term cheap, but certainly reliable and cost-effective electricity and power for their businesses. They are very, very vulnerable. The small businesses are very vulnerable. And therefore, we need to find a way of removing that vulnerability and giving them instant access, not a promise of power in years to come.
Okay, makes sense. And a lot has been said about the current government being a pro-poor government. Are they delivering pro-poor budgets?
Not quite frankly. If we look at it, depending how you define pro-poor, the only element of pro-poor, which is unfortunate, is this rising dependency through welfare payments. I rather support SMEs and make sure that the tax revenues are used to subsidize, as I mentioned, their businesses and underpin their sustainability and job creation and so on and so forth, instead of paying 350 rand per month in the name of being pro-poor. And that, technically speaking, is against the poor, because we make the poor forever dependent on politicians and on inefficient government departments. So I think we need to move. We have to be pro-poor. We need to address the issue of public sector wage story, which you referred to in your insert. We cannot make the government more and more top-heavy, meaning another minister, 40 million rand a year, another deputy minister, another this, another that. These are all top-heavy type of overhead for our government that this economy and this society cannot afford. So we need to be pro-poor by cutting the fat out of the top, improving the whole face of service delivery, nurses, policemen and women, and teachers and so on, and make sure that they deliver to the poor quality protection, quality health, quality service. So that's where we need to reimagine and rethink operationally the concept of pro-poor. Every time that somebody says pro-poor because we're paying 20 million people every month, 350 rand a month, that is not being pro-poor. Quite frankly, that's being against the poor, making them forever dependent.
Dr. Iraj Abedian, Chief Economist at Pan-African Investments and Research Services. Thank you.